Oh, hello everybody. Welcome back to the show. I'll put this away. This is for a up-and-coming video. All I've heard about this week is how Tucker Carlson is a traitor for interviewing Vladimir Putin. So today we're going to dive into it a little bit. I know it's late, but I just got done. At time of filming, it is 10:30 at night. I just got done watching the Tucker interview with Vladimir Putin, and I've got some things I would like to discuss. I've got 3 points here that I would like to bring up, at least that are important to me from the interview, and I hope you find it informational as well. So, but let's answer the overarching question: is Tucker Carlson a traitor for interviewing Vladimir Putin? In my honest opinion, absolutely not. Tucker Carlson is a journalist, and as a journalist, it is his job to get to the truth of everything. And whether you agree with the war in Ukraine, whether you agree that America should be funding or not, we have to be honest with ourselves. There is a lot of gaslighting and a lot of false narratives being thrown around in regards to Ukraine. So it's nice to hear from the opponent's side and what he can and can't do. So with that said, well, when I say he, I mean Vladimir Putin is willing to do and open to do, and his answers were surprisingly more neutral and more calm than I thought they would be. So I was expecting him to I mean, and he brought it up a lot, but it wasn't the overarching point. He did talk about the neo-Nazism that is in Ukraine, which that is a fact. There are several you know what, we'll get into it in a minute. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hello everybody. Now's the time in the video where we discuss our sponsor being USCCA. USCCA is a casualty and property insurance company that also provides training and basic gun knowledge to every and all gun concealed carriers, open carriers, owners. Everything you need to know about owning a firearm or carrying a firearm legally, USCCA has you covered. If you go to the link below, you'll see that they have the little pamphlet about how to 6 ways to interact with law enforcement after an incident has happened, which I think I found it very useful, so I'm sharing it with everybody else. Especially as I live in a very high crime area, to which I hope I never have to pull it, as always, but it gives you some decent knowledge as to how to approach the situation when law enforcement comes and gets involved. Again, thank you USCCA for expressing their interest in me as a YouTuber, and I hope you all find it as informative as well. Thanks again. Alrighty everyone, back to what I was talking about. So to start, Tucker's not a traitor. He's a journalist, as I said before. His job as a journalist is to get to the truth, not just one nation's truth, but the whole truth. And I think the interview showed us a side of Vladimir Putin that a lot of us have mischaracterized. Now, do I think the war is justified? Absolutely not. But hearing his side and seeing what generated the immediate start, it was rather informative to me, and it actually tickled my tism a little bit, because Vladimir Putin actually brought up some good points that I can't really argue with, outside of him being delusional in some aspects. But let's get into the list, okay? Before I go down the tangent. So my number one thing I picked up was Putin is intelligent, intimidating, and delusional. Well, what do I mean by that? So he's intelligent because if you hear him talk throughout the interview, he actually knows a thing or two about the history of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the state that he now runs. And he uses that history to tie into why he has the rights over Ukraine. Like, I didn't know this. So when the Soviet Union was being formed, Stalin created the Ukrainian state as a form of a buffer between the heartland of Mother Russia and the Eastern Bloc and what we now know as NATO. But I also didn't know that there was a strong Hungarian culture that grew up in there. So according to Vladimir Putin, he talks about how when in the 80s when he was in the KGB, he discusses that at length his tour there in Ukraine, and he's like, there was no Ukrainian culture. Now, I can't confirm or deny that. I don't know much about the history. Again, this is just strictly information I got from the interview. He said that there was no Ukrainian culture. It was a blend. It was either on the eastern side of Ukraine, it was Russian. Language was spoken was Russian. The culture was Russian. But then the further west you went, the more Hungarian culture you had. People spoke Hungarian dialects. They spoke Hungarian language. They dressed in Hungarian garb, which I found that interesting. And also considering that Hungary was a ally to the Nazis in World War II, that kind of doesn't surprise me that neo-Nazism was able to kind of find a safe haven in Ukraine for it to grow and fester. Which again, that's something that we don't talk about here in America because we blindly believe that Ukraine they are the good guys. They're the better of the two evils, but they're really, it's the same coin, just a flip. You're just flipping which side you want. It's a 50-50 chance who's the good guy over there. But this is what makes him delusional, in my opinion. He's using these justifications as a way to establish and legitimize his war in Ukraine. So when he says that, well, historically speaking, us Russians founded Kiev, us Russians established the culture there. Yes, it's true, but in doing so, and saying that you're legitimizing that claim, you can't ignore you can't ignore history. The fault, and I'm willing to give him a little bit of leeway here. I'll say, yeah, it was still Russian all the way up until, because even though Stalin established Ukraine as a state, you can't ignore the fact that they've been their own country in solidarity since 1991, and that's 32 years of non-Russian occupation, which we've seen what happened in their own cultures in less time than that, even long before the fall of the Soviet Union, long before the rise of Nazism. A good example of this is how after the fall of the Austria-Hungarian Empire in 1918, pretty much, when World War I ended, all those nations that were once under that empire were immediately very, very culturally diverse. I mean, they've always been culturally diverse. They were essentially conquered, but they were able to establish their own nationalism, national finite culture within the quick 10 years between League of Nations signing and 1930s. So that's where I think he's a little delusional, and rightly so. Like, again, that's just going to prove that maybe he is the bad guy here. And again, I'm no war expert, and and anybody that knows me, you follow my channel, you know I have no love for Russian culture. I have no love for communism. Yeah, the fascist state that it became after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I take everything that Putin says with a grain of salt because he was a KGB specialist. He knows how to speak. And that's why his intelligence is very intimidating, because not only does he have all this knowledge, he knows how to speak. Like, hearing him speak versus hearing our own president speak in interviews, it's frightening. But Tucker asks him some very basic questions, and he gives these long, complicated answers that they answer the question, but it's a very academic way of answering. It's like asking Jordan B. Peterson a question. He gives long, drawn-out answers because he also uses examples to back up his answers. Now, again, the examples are on the delusional side, and on the very, very trying to win over the culture favor here, but it is it's intimidating because he knows how to answer these questions, and as much as we all thought over here, like that we've heard rumors the last 6 months about him being having mental issues, him having heart attacks and stuff, and I was expecting to see someone up there in this interview with the same kind of physique as our own president, because he's up there. Vladimir Putin's also up there in age as well, but he wasn't. He answered the questions. He gave very long, intelligent, and intelligently built answers to these questions. In some cases, he kind of walked the question around itself and didn't answer the question, but it was still something that he spoke as if you wanted to listen to him. It's that cult of personality thing that I think that a lot of us get lost in when we think of Vladimir Putin. So that was the first thing that I took from the interview. The second thing is, Tucker asked him the question, why did he wait till now to start the war? Why did he wait till 2 years ago? If he had all this sentiment building while he was first president in 2000 under the Clinton administration, why did he wait till now? Well, he gave a really, I can't blame him for this answer. He saw that, in his mindset, and again, take everything he says with a grain of salt, because he is a fascist, he is a communist. No, I shouldn't say, he's a former communist. He's not, from hearing him speak, doesn't sound like he holds very much of that communist rhetoric, as much as he does that nationalistic fascism pride, which I'm using the word fascist in the most political sense. It's not like the Nazi fascism, but it's more of like the Mussolini fascism idea of just rebuilding what was once ours, in his idea of rebuilding the Roman Empire. Putin saw in the last 5 years, NATO has grown extravagantly, like taking in something that was considered taboo, because we always wanted, I shouldn't say we, but the Western world always thought it would be nice to have a buffer zone between Russia and us, even after the fall of the Soviet Union. So nations like Sweden, Finland, Belarus, Ukraine, Poland, all these nations were supposed to act as kind of like a buffer zone, but then Poland got let into was one of the first ones that got let back into the fold of NATO, and I believe it was the 80s. I'll look that up and I'll put the correct answer here. Scared Putin was in 2020, Sweden and Finland joined the fold, or at least applied to join the fold. And then when President Zelensky became president, which his whole theory of how Zelensky became president, he blames the United States CIA for it. I will dig more into that and maybe do another video on that by itself, just to see if he's right or not, because if he's right, I'm not shocked. The CIA was notorious for doing that in the 70s and the 80s. We did it in South American countries. We've done it in the Middle East. So if they were to help prop up, especially someone with very little political background, like Zelensky he's not exactly what you would imagine as a politician. I believe he's a comedian. He started off as a comedian, and he was just very popular. But he wasn't very wealthy. Well, I mean, again, there's a whole conspiracy theory about that. So we'll go down that path at a later time. But in his mindset, the CIA propped him up and put him in power, with the mentality of creating a satellite state for NATO in Ukraine, which borders Russia, which I can imagine, as any nationalist would think, this is a threat to me because that buffer zone that we once agreed upon. And he went down a rabbit hole talking about multiple meetings he had about trying to not expand NATO because he wanted to feel comfortable. Because Russia's had a long history in his mindset. They wanted to regrow, rebuild their culture. So the rapid expansion of NATO the last 5 years scared him. And that's what prompted the attacks starting in 2014 with the Crimean annexation and the more recent, obviously, the more recent Ukrainian war that's going on now. So his biggest fear is it becoming a satellite nation, which I don't carry the banner of Ukraine. I was born in America. I am an America first interest. And I know a lot of political theorists that believe that us fighting in Ukraine is a good thing because it's keeping Russia weak. After watching this interview, I don't know how to feel about that anymore because we'll get into that in a minute. Actually, that's a good segue into what my third and final point is, again, I'm going to preface this by saying take everything he says with a grain of salt because he is a fascist. He builds on his cult of personality. He has tried to reach out to Western powers for peace talks, apparently. And they refused to meet with him on fair grounds because of his past and what he's done and what his country's done. And they pretty much 110% side with Zelensky. He brought up the Nord Stream pipeline. He brought up how Russia, if they would discuss peace talks, would be able to have a happy Europe because of the resources that Russia can provide to the rest of Europe. Which, in all fairness, that's a good point. But at the same time, he started a war. But in this interview, he actually says that he is open to discussion on bringing it into it. Because apparently his gripe is not directly with the Ukrainian people. His gripe is with NATO forces. So all in all, it was definitely an enlightening video. I'm not going to say whether it was whether it helped him out, because like I said, some of the stuff he said did prove that he is definitely living in past times. He is definitely thinking he's not thinking like us in the West would. It's not purely financially driven. Which he talked about the United States. He actually has surprisingly a lot of knowledge on the U.S. dollar affecting the world. Was very enlightening. Not to me, not that big of a deal because that's where we've screwed up a lot with that lately. So it's an argument of his that I can kind of agree with. But I was surprised with how much knowledge he had on that subject. Also, as I bring this to a close, Tucker asked him great questions and definitely kept the interview in a steady pace. It was very educational, very informative, and it was entertaining. And this is a little gripe. My personal gripe with the world today. For some reason, the world today does not want to hear both sides of the story. They want to hear the sides that they agree on and they agree on alone. To me, I think that's bad for any type of a productive conversation. That's like saying, like when you go to these colleges and they want to kick, I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat speaking, they want to kick these people off the campus because A, they don't agree with them. 2, they know that if other people hear the idea, it might make them change their mind. And I think that's something the world desperately needs right now. We need people like Tucker who is willing to go out and talk to the opponent, talk to the bad guy, because I can't remember what military general said it, but I think it's one of the greatest quotes. In order to know yourself, you need, or in order to win a battle, to win the war, you need to know your enemy. And I think us as in Western culture have lost that, whether it be in a political discussion, whether it be even among friends. I believe that it is something that we have lost. And I'm glad to see Tucker, despite all the hate, despite all the criticisms he's going to get, still conducted the interview, and it was well put together, well done, and it definitely gives you some insight into Putin's thought process going into this conflict. It just sucks that it took 2 years for us to get this kind of an interview from someone. So either he's losing the war that bad that he's trying to gain some cultural support or some world support, or he's had enough of it and he's using Tucker's platform to tell the world, hey, I'm willing to discuss peace. It's your leadership that doesn't want peace. So that's my 2 cents on it. I hope YouTube doesn't deplatform me or not allow my stuff into the algorithm because of my opinions on this. I've been very neutral on the whole Ukraine issue because of stuff like this. Stuff he brought up in the interview. He brought up the neo-Nazi culture that is prevalent in Ukraine, and anybody that says it's not, they're looking through. They're in that spectrum that says, hey, I am not going to look at the other side. I'm only looking at the good, and I don't only want to hear the good, which is, again, infantile and dangerous for anybody that wants to form an opinion on something. And I'm going to bring this to a close because I don't know how else I'm going to end it. Stay strong, watch your six. And if you believe that something that I said is a little controversial and you have your own 2 takes on it, put in the comments. I may not respond to you, but I like hearing other opinions. So stay strong, watch your six, and have a good night.